Hello, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me on our news panel, Bob Egelko, staff writer for the San Francisco Chronicle on the Walmart gender discrimination suit. Judy Lynn, Sacramento Associated Press reporter on the governor's plan to sell off state buildings. Sandip Roy, editor for New America Media on fears of violence in the Asian American community. And Rachel Gordon, staff writer for the San Francisco Chronicle on boycotting Arizona. Rachel, this whole idea of a boycott seems to be really spreading. It's caught on fire. What's next?
Well, what's next is the people who are calling for a boycott have to see how they can actually do it. We have to go back to about 8 days ago when the governor of Arizona signed a sweeping anti-immigration bill that makes it a crime for immigrants to be in Arizona without proof of legal residency. They can be stopped, detained by police, questioned, and if they're found to not have the proper papers, they can be tossed out of Arizona, tossed into jail, and maybe tossed back out of the United States. That quickly galvanized a lot of people saying this is an unfair law. It will lead to racial profiling. Quickly out of the box, the state of California, Darrell Steinberg, the Senate leader, said that they're looking at a boycott for this. City officials in San Francisco, including Mayor Gavin Newsom, are looking at a boycott. Oakland, Los Angeles, it's really kind of gaining steam there. What they want to do, though, is say, okay, what businesses do we do business with in San Francisco and Oakland, Los Angeles, and the state? Can we then try to sever contracts or not forge any new contracts with businesses that are headquartered in the state of Arizona? Sounds like a kind of simple thing to say, but boy, when you start going down and digging deep down into it, it's a really difficult thing to figure out. Where are they headquartered? Where are they incorporated? Where are their home offices? Where do they have employees? They're trying to unscramble all of that right now. And they also want to see, well, if they do this, who's it going to hurt? Is it going to send a message? Is that's what they want to do? But will it hurt the same people that they're trying to protect?
I was going to say, I hope they never try to boycott Delaware, right? Isn't everybody incorporated in Delaware?
But Rachel, people talk about the time that this nation involved in a boycott of South Africa, less complicated times in terms of the globalization of the business world. Have people talked about it? Or are they considering that a comparison? Because it would seem to be totally different.
Well, it is. I mean, well, it is a comparison in some ways with the South Africa sanctions, with the world really coming together and really putting the pressure on the racist states saying you've got to do something, and eventually that was uncorked, and we see the change that's happened there. But really, as you said, with the globalization, it really is hard to kind of unravel where these ties are. But we're also seeing kind of other pressure being put on. The Major League Baseball Players Association today came out with a very strong statement saying that they want Arizona to repeal or vastly modify the law. They're saying, look, Arizona is a baseball state in many ways. A lot of spring training goes on there. They're the Arizona Diamondbacks. And in fact, next year, the Major League Baseball All-Star Game is going to be played there. We had San Francisco City Attorney Dennis Herrera and Supervisor David Campos calling on Major League Baseball to pull out of that. We saw a black fraternal organization today, which is going to planning to have a conference there saying we're leaving the state. We're going to go to Las Vegas instead. So they're pulling their business. And we might start to see some movement in Arizona. We also might start to see some backlash, though, because people right away brought up, okay, you may not like what happens in Arizona. Do you folks really like what's happening in San Francisco? Do you think people are going to boycott San Francisco for some of the stances we've taken on everything from immigrant rights to gay marriage, whatever you might say? And this is a tourist industry in town. So there could be a lot of back and forth.
But, is any of the people who are calling for a boycott in California also pointing out the fact that, a lot of what's happening in Arizona with immigration now is really California having shunted this problem next door? Because, I was reading that in 1992, I think 8% of all illegal border crossings was apprehended in Arizona. And by 2000, it had gone up to 45%. And that's partly because in California, we were fortifying the border and making it so much harder for people to cross through the traditional routes near Tijuana. So everybody thought is crossing, everyone thought once you go to Arizona, the terrain is so forbidding, people won't cross through there anymore. It just made it more dangerous to cross, just harder to cross, but people still coming. So we just funneled the immigration problem through Arizona.
Is this now a time to have a discussion about federal immigration reform?
I mean, that's what everyone's calling for. Republicans and Democrats are saying, really, why is this up to the states to deal with this? Why is it up to local governments to take positions? We know what's happening, though, at the federal level. Whenever the immigration reform ideas have come up, they've been it's galvanized the nation. They haven't been able to move forward with it. I mean, we're even seeing it play out on the national politics a little bit. Senator John McCain is in a tough re-election battle in Arizona. He was one of the big proponents of immigration reform, and now he's saying, boy, this Arizona law is the way to go. We're seeing with the Senate leader, Democratic Senate leader, Harry Reid, kind of on the other side of it, because he needs to get the Hispanic vote in his home state. So now he's saying this is the wrong way to
Rachel,
go.
there are major demonstrations planned for this coming weekend. Has this reignited or reset the button on the whole question of what we do about the whole thing of immigration?
I think it absolutely has, but you have to look, if it comes from the Obama administration, what are they going to do about it? They just came off the bruising battle over health care. He's looking at climate change. They're trying to do financial regulation reform there. Does he also want to take this hot button issue of immigration reform as we're heading into the midterm elections? I mean, maybe that is what it's going to take to get the voters out on both sides, and you're just going to see where it ends up, but it's a pretty difficult subject to tackle.
That brings us to our next subject, which is Sandip Roy's subject, and it has to do too with fear, people not understanding one another. Lots of fear in the Asian community about some pretty bad incidents that have taken place. What is the community saying?
I think, in a sense, Belva, what it's saying is they want to be heard. And, this is coming in the wakes about 2 weeks ago when a 50-plus-year-old Asian man, Mr. Yu, was assaulted in Oakland and he died. 2 African-American teenagers were arrested and charged. But if you listen to a lot of the Chinese talk shows, there's immense amount of fear about these attacks. But New American media, actually my colleague Aaron Glantz did some research too. If you just look at the numbers, the homicide numbers, they don't necessarily mirror the sentiments. I mean, in San Francisco, Asians outnumber African Americans by 5 to 1. When you look at homicides, African Americans are 10 times more likely to be the victims of homicides. So that's one fact on one side. But then the Asian Americans say, that doesn't mean that there isn't this fear. It's about incidents that happened on Muni. It's about people who got attacked in Hunters Point, and the 83-year-old man who was attacked in January this year, 57-year-old woman attacked in the same Muni stop. And it's about iPods being snatched. It's about seniors feeling scared. So in a sense, even if and it's also about a lot of Asians feeling, they don't necessarily report these kinds of crimes to police. So it's this sense of like, how do you have this dialogue without tripping the racial tension wire every time? The mayor offered a $100,000 reward recently for any information about the death of the 83-year-old man who was attacked in January. And, at one level that could be welcomed. At another level, people would, it could reignite the thing where people would say, you offer the $100,000 reward for this case, but you don't offer it, when there's just last week a church shooting in Oakland.
Is this being viewed as a law enforcement problem, a social problem? Who are the leaders? Who should be the wheel turners on this?
Well, here is kind of the interesting thing. If you look at some of the Chinese media, you'll see that a lot of the anger is directed at some of the Chinese American leadership here. The elected political leaders, where the World Journal had an editorial saying, the Chinese American elected leaders come to us every election wanting to get out the community, rally the community, put up your posters in the small businesses that they run. But why are they not at the forefront of this? Why are they not holding vigils and rallies and things
it's interesting, though. There was a big hearing or a big turnout at the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco this week with hundreds of people coming, mainly Chinese Americans coming down there to say talk about their concerns and their fears. And you did hear the Chinese American leaders on the Board of Supervisors saying, yeah, we hear you, we understand, they're going to be back again next week. I mean, I think that this really has gotten the attention of official San Francisco. We're seeing the same thing in Oakland as well, where the fatal attack was in recent weeks. But where do you go from here? I mean, this doesn't seem like it's a new problem. It's the same thing that when I was in high school in the late 70s, where there are the same tensions between the Black and Chinese communities.
Because it's demographic changing. It's about people moving into each other's community. As somebody said, sometimes we tolerate each other, but we don't converse with each other in the same level. And so, the only way to, Belva, I've been on this show, 2-3 years ago, when there was this whole fuss about Asian Week publishing an op-ed about why I hate blacks, and that caused the community to actually come together, and Chinese, African American, Korean papers themselves put the money to do a poll about interethnic, relations in the state.
Well, I was at a discussion where the chief of police of Oakland and the superintendent of schools in Oakland, and they saw this as an intersecting problem between truancy, young people not being in school, not having supervision, and so forth. Are there these talk forums or something that are going to go on to try to bring these communities together?
I think these forums will be very necessary. And I think here I should point out that even some of the Chinese media, even though some of the Chinese talk shows say they're getting a lot of calls from people who are really upset about it, who feel like they're not heard, but a lot of the Chinese media are also trying to bring these together. So the World Journal and Tsingtao, in their coverage, they chose on their photographs coverage of Mrs. Yu, the widow, being consoled by an African American woman. They gave a lot of coverage to the fact that Mrs. Yu went to the black churches in Oakland on Sunday as part of their sermon. And I think she has come through in all of this as really somebody who is refusing to let this incident become a source of racial tension.
We've been on a very high emotional level up to now. So let's move to some buildings. And that, of course, is where we are with you, Judy Lynn, in your story. The governor has been trying to sell off some office buildings, some of them, sacred cows, we'll call it that. Debatable whether it's 12 or 24, depending on what you're reading. Where is the debate now? We thought there'd be a decision this week.
Yeah. No, the legislature held a hearing in the Capitol, and they had a lot of questions for the administration. Why did he let go some of his appointees, and how much is this going to cost taxpayers in the long run? Clearly, there was a legislative analyst report that found that their costs will be higher for taxpayers if we rent instead of own these buildings. Things like the San Francisco Civic Center, where the state Supreme Court is housed, and down in Los Angeles, the Ronald Reagan building, and many of them in Sacramento. It's just a question of how severe is the budget that we want to get some cash up front to help plug up the deficit now, and trade off these buildings that have been a part of California's fixture for decades.
Isn't that just politics as usual, that you deal with a problem here and now? Schwarzenegger's not going to be in office for a long time. He's got this problem to confront now. How is he going to close this budget gap? As you said, why worry about 5 or 10 years out? It doesn't seem many politicians do that. They might talk it, but they don't always do it.
They might not talk it because we have people who are in office for 2 or 4 years or whatever. But Schwarzenegger, I suppose, is somewhat concerned about his legacy. Is his legacy going to be, selling off the buildings, costing the state money, apparently stacking state panels so that nobody disagrees with them? I'm not saying that this isn't something that we might have to do. I mean, after all, we borrow money all the time, and it costs us a lot more to pay it back. But doesn't this kind of suggest that state government right now is making short-term decisions and the heck with the long-term?
But also the symbolism of it. Has nobody talked about the symbolism of selling off the building that houses, your Supreme Court? It's like justice for sale, literally. We're going to sell it off?
Yeah,
For rent.
Or justice for rent.
No, there was one state lawmaker who had voted against this, Assemblyman Jim Silva. He had noted that look, the state is in the business of owning real estate. We care for parks and beaches and forests, and we are here to manage land. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing to have real estate. And I think the governor, is in a really tough position, and he has had a track record of throwing out unusual, if not creative, ideas, whether it's selling the lottery. That was another one that didn't really quite work out.
Well, he's ruled out any means of raising revenue. So he's in a tough position, somewhat self-imposed limitations.
Yeah,
right?
they did. It was hard just to get temporary tax increases, especially. And I think that's a reflection of the high 2/3 majority vote that we have to pass our budget.
What's next?
What's next? All the bids from the sellers are in, so it's the administration is reviewing the bids. We'll see how high they come in. If it's financially doable, you might see the the governor going ahead with the sale, but the legislature always has the authority to review it, and so there was talk of, drawing up legislation to prevent it. So right now we're waiting for the governor to reveal the prices that he can get for these buildings.
And he can go right ahead if he decides to do that.
He can propose it, but the legislature, there will be oversight. The legislature does have the authority to try to stop him.
Well, talking about oversight, Bob, you have what is probably the biggest workplace discrimination lawsuit ever filed or ever allowed to go forward in this country. Why don't you tell us what's the story with Walmart?
Well, Walmart was sued in 2001 by 6 women from different states, several from California. The lead plaintiff is local, charging sex discrimination in pay and in promotions. The statistics are that 65% of Walmart's employees are women, 14% of the store managers are women. Women are paid less in every region of the country, and they take longer to move up the corporate ladder than men do. However, there is no central corporate policy that you can point your finger at and say, there, they have a policy of not paying or promoting women. That's what makes this a tough suit, and it makes it a tough case for a class action. Class action is where a lot of people with similar complaints file a suit together rather than having to take on somebody singly. What happened, just so I can set the stage, what happened this week was the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in a 6-5 ruling that split very much along kind of presidential appointee lines said that this suit could go forward as a class action, probably with upwards of 1 million women in the class. It would be the largest civil rights suit ever filed. Walmart has one more avenue to go to, and that's the U.S. Supreme Court, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility that the U.S. Supreme Court will take this case.
Can I ask you just what you said about the company not having a policy that's explicitly discriminatory against women?
Right.
Are there any companies in this day and age that would actually have some kind of written policy like that, or isn't it just more of a culture?
Yeah,
that they're looking at?
I mean, I think you're right. At least in this day and age, discrimination suits, sometimes you can find at a local level. Some manager says something, or you can show that they've never hired or promoted anybody. But this is such a large company, and it's one in which promotion and pay decisions are made at the local level. So Walmart says, how can we possibly have this? Well, the plaintiffs presented some expert testimony. Number one, on the statistics that I mentioned. Number two, comparing it with other retailers and saying, they are much more equal. And number three, an expert saying that they have a centralized corporate culture where there's basically a uniform personnel policy that is prone to discrimination. And 6 judges on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said that's enough to let this case go forward. 5 of them dissented and said, really, there's no uniform policy. How can you call this a class? These plaintiffs have nothing more in common than their gender and the fact that they work for Walmart. And if this case can go ahead as a class action, remember, corporations do not like class actions. They'd rather go one-on-one, and like that. There have been laws passed recently federally to make class actions harder. But if this case can be filed as a class action, so can any national or international corporation. That looked like a signal to the John Roberts Supreme Court to say, wait a minute, you've got to put the brakes on even at this early stage of the case. Because if this goes forward, the next step would be a trial, but there'll be strong pressure on Walmart to settle and avoid the multi-billion-dollar damage award that almost surely, would await.
Bob, but there is some, delicious irony in the fact that the mother of all retailers is facing the mother of all gender discrimination class lawsuits.
Right.
But is Walmart more concerned about the money, or it's had so much PR problems before? Is that its bigger concern?
Well, and of course, bad PR can translate into money as well. I would assume that they're concerned about both. They make a lot of statements saying that that we have a very equal policy and all of our employees are treated equally and the like. But so far, it's been legal arguments. We don't. This isn't appropriate for a class action. You're ignoring precedent and like that. But where it's going is to a U.S. Supreme Court that recently showed that it is sensitive to, the interest of corporations, let's say, to contribute money to campaigns, and also does not interpret civil rights laws very broadly.
All right, so we know you'll be back here on that one.
Let's hope so.
Well, my thanks to all of you for joining me here tonight.